There is a place where humanity built a cathedral to truth, not of stone and stained glass, but of superconducting magnets and precision instruments. The European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, sprawls across the border of Switzerland and France, its tunnels reaching deeper than any crypt, its ambitions higher than any spire. Here, physicists accelerate particles to nearly the speed of light, smashing them together in a violence so controlled it approaches prayer. For 60 years, this machine has asked the universe its most fundamental questions, and for 60 years, the universe has answered, in data streams, in collision patterns, in the mathematics of creation itself. This is where Dr. Mira Chen comes each morning, believing, as all scientists must believe, that truth is worth pursuing. That measurement reveals reality, that what we find will set us free. Mira Chen was not looking for God. She was mapping gravitational anomalies, routine work, the kind that fills the years between discoveries. 42 years old, divorced, childless by choice. She had given her life to physics because physics never disappointed her. Equations balanced, experiments could be repeated. Unlike human relationships, unlike love, unlike faith, the universe played by rules that could be learned. She trusted data the way priests trust scripture, and her data was telling her something strange. Small inconsistencies, gravity readings that deviated from theory by fractions of a percent. Her colleagues dismissed them as instrumentation error. The machines were sensitive enough to detect a butterfly's wing beat on another continent. Of course there would be noise, but Mira had spent 20 years learning to read noise, and this noise had a pattern. The deviation was always in the same direction. Gravity, the most predictable force in the universe, was fluctuating, not randomly, but with a rhythm she couldn't explain. She ran the numbers again, calibrated the instruments, checked the superconducting magnets for interference. Everything was functioning within specifications. The error wasn't in her machines, it was in reality itself. Late one night, she overlaid her data with population maps, not because she expected to find anything, but because scientists learn to correlate everything with everything. Looking for connections is how discoveries happen. She expected nothing. What she found made her close her laptop and sit in the dark for an hour, afraid to look again. Gravity was stronger in cities, weaker in deserts. The force that kept the moon in orbit appeared to respond to human presence. She began walking the tunnels at night when the accelerator was quiet. 27 kilometers of precision engineering curving beneath farms and vineyards where people slept, unaware of the violence happening below them. Here, protons reached 99.9999% of the speed of light. Here, conditions that hadn't existed since the first microseconds after the Big Bang were recreated daily. And here, Mira Chen paced, trying to understand what her instruments were telling her. Gravity, Einstein taught us, is the curvature of space-time caused by mass. More mass, more gravity. Simple, beautiful, true. Except her data suggested otherwise. The readings correlated not with mass, but with something else entirely. Something that shouldn't matter at all. The number of conscious minds nearby. The density of human attention. Her Geneva apartment had become a secondary lab. Papers covered every surface, printouts of data, historical records of gravitational measurements, population statistics spanning 2 centuries. She had stopped calling her ex-husband, stopped answering emails from friends. The world outside these walls seemed increasingly unreal, a stage set maintained by forces she was only beginning to comprehend. She had always believed that truth was singular, that reality existed independent of observation, that the universe would behave the same whether anyone watched or not. This was the foundation of science, the bedrock of everything she trusted. But what if the bedrock was a lie? What if the universe didn't exist independent of observation, because observation was what held it together? The thought should have seemed insane. Instead, it fit her data perfectly. The night shift was the best time for unorthodox experiments. Fewer colleagues to question her methods. Fewer eyes to see her accessing classified historical data. She had found references to similar anomalies in archives marked instrumentation error, dating back decades. Scientists had noticed. Scientists had been curious. And then the curiosity had stopped. Files ended mid-investigation. Researchers transferred to other projects. One had retired suddenly. Another had died in a car accident. Patterns emerged that had nothing to do with gravity and everything to do with silence. Someone had been watching. Someone had been managing. And now, Mira suspected, someone was watching her. The machine hummed its endless song, particles dancing their violent ballet, and in the data streams she saw the faint outline of a truth that had been hidden for longer than she could imagine. She made her first mistake when she went public. Not public to the world, just to her team. A dozen physicists who had worked with her for years. She presented her findings carefully. The correlation between gravitational variance and population density, the historical pattern of similar observations, the statistical impossibility of coincidence. She expected skepticism. She received something worse. Dismissal mixed with something she couldn't quite name. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. Instrumentation error, Dr. Heinrich said, not meeting her eyes. Correlation without causation, Dr. Patel added, already gathering his notes. The meeting ended 12 minutes after it began. That afternoon, she was summoned to a conversation with the facility director. Nothing official, just a friendly discussion about her mental health, her recent divorce, the stress of working alone too many nights. She sat alone in the empty room, her data still glowing on the screen. The graphs showed what they showed. The numbers said what they said. She had not misread them. She had not invented them. And yet she had watched a dozen trained scientists look directly at evidence and refuse to see it. This was not how science worked. Science followed evidence. Science demanded that conclusions match observations, unless the conclusions were too dangerous to consider. She thought of Galileo, forced to recant what his telescope revealed, of Semmelweis, who proved hand-washing saved lives and was committed to an asylum for his trouble. History was full of truths that humanity wasn't ready to hear, but those truths had been accepted eventually. The evidence had won. What if some evidence never won? What if some truths were actively suppressed, not by ignorance, but by design? The paper trail led backward through time. She found the 1962 report buried in a sub-basement archive, physical files that had never been digitized. Dr. Werner Schultz, Munich Institute of Physics. His gravitational surveys showed the same anomalies she had found. His handwritten notes grew increasingly excited, then increasingly paranoid, then stopped entirely. The final entry, met with representatives from an unspecified governmental body, advised to discontinue research. His career file showed a transfer to administrative work. He never published again. She dug deeper, 1923, 1847, 1791. Each time a scientist approached this truth, their investigation ended. Transfers, retirements, accidents. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone had known about this for at least 2 centuries. Someone had made it their business to ensure no one else found out. The Schultz report contained a hypothesis she had not dared to formulate. Gravity, he wrote, may not be a property of mass, but a property of consensus. The force we measure appears to respond not to physical objects, but to the collective expectation that objects will behave in certain ways. Reality, in other words, may be a kind of shared dream, and gravity is simply what we all agree it should be. He had even named the phenomenon consensus substrate. The foundation layer of reality maintained not by physical law, but by unconscious human agreement. Mira read the words again and again. They should have seemed insane. They explained everything, every anomaly, every correlation, every terminated investigation. If reality was consensus, then proving it would be the most dangerous discovery in human history. She worked through the night, pulling together threads that spanned centuries. The gravitational constant had been measured differently in different eras, always attributed to improving instruments. But the improvements tracked precisely with population growth. More humans, more stable gravity. She found references to unexplained disasters in areas that experienced sudden population collapse. Pompeii, the Black Death's hardest hit regions, the Dust Bowl, places where human presence dropped rapidly and physical anomalies followed. Not earthquakes caused by tectonic activity, collapses in the fabric of expectation. The Tunguska event of 1908 had always been a mystery, an explosion equivalent to a nuclear bomb in an unpopulated Siberian forest. No impact crater, no meteor fragments, just devastation in a place where human consensus was thin, where reality had less to hold on to. She stepped back and looked at what she had assembled. 200 years of suppressed evidence, dozens of careers ended or redirected, deaths that might not have been accidents. And at the center of it all, a single terrifying truth. Reality was not given. Reality was maintained. Every second of every day, billions of human minds unconsciously agreed that the sky would stay up, that objects would fall when dropped, that time would flow forward. This agreement wasn't metaphor. It was engineering. The physical constants we measured were not discovered. They were remembered into being. And someone had known this. Someone had always known. They had spent centuries ensuring that no one else found out. Not out of malice, Mira began to understand. Out of necessity. Because the last time this truth leaked out, civilizations had fallen. She had to test the hypothesis directly. If gravity responded to conscious observation, then controlled changes in observer density should produce measurable effects. She designed an experiment that would horrify any ethics board. Using CERN's global network connections, she arranged for thousands of students across 3 continents to focus their attention on a single gravitational sensor, simultaneously, for exactly 30 seconds. The sensor was isolated, shielded from every known interference. If the consensus hypothesis was wrong, nothing would happen. If it was right, the readings would spike. She had told no one, used no official channels. This was not science as it should be done. This was desperation. The kind that comes when you've glimpsed something so vast, it threatens to swallow everything you thought you knew. At 3:47 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, 10,000 students turned their attention to a sensor buried beneath the Swiss Alps. And at 3:47 p.m., that sensor recorded a gravitational anomaly larger than anything in its operational history. The spike lasted exactly 30 seconds. It began when attention began. It ended when attention ended. The correlation was absolute. Mira watched the data arrive and felt her worldview cracking like ice under too much weight. This was not instrumentation error. This was not coincidence. Human consciousness was affecting gravitational constants. The implications cascaded through her mind faster than she could process them. If this was true, if belief shaped physics, then everything science had ever measured was not a discovery of objective reality, but a reflection of collective expectation. She pulled up global maps, population density versus gravitational stability. The correlation was devastating in its clarity. Cities glowed with stable gravity. Deserts and oceans showed subtle fluctuations. The deep Amazon, the Sahara's heart, the vast emptiness of Antarctica, these places quivered at the edge of physical law. She zoomed in on abandoned areas. Pripyat, evacuated after Chernobyl, showed increasing gravitational instability over 3 decades of emptiness. Rural areas losing population to urban migration exhibited slow drift from expected values. The fabric of reality, she now understood, was not uniform. It was a patchwork quilt sewn together by human presence. Where people concentrated, the quilt held firm. Where they departed, the stitches began to fray. She was looking at the architecture of existence itself, and it was far more fragile than anyone knew. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating regular meals. Her apartment transformed into an extension of her mind, every surface covered with correlations, theories, historical evidence. She was mapping the impossible, documenting a truth that had been suppressed for longer than her country had existed. But the more she learned, the more she understood why it had been suppressed. If this knowledge spread, what would happen? If people learned that reality depended on their collective belief, would that belief falter? Would the knowing itself break what was known? She was holding a bomb with no safe way to defuse it. The truth she had sought all her life was dangerous, not abstractly dangerous, not philosophically dangerous, but physically dangerous. The kind of truth that could collapse the sky. The phone appeared on her desk one morning, a device she had never purchased, containing a single message. You are not the first to find this. You will not be the last. The question is what you do next. No sender identification, no way to reply. But the message was proof that she was being watched, and proof that whoever watched her had the power to enter her apartment without leaving a trace. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt something like relief. The conspiracy was real. The suppression was intentional. She was not insane, not paranoid, not seeing patterns in noise. Others knew. Others had always known. And now, for whatever reason, they were reaching out. The question they asked was the same one she had been asking herself. What would she do with truth this dangerous? The letter arrived 3 days later, not through mail, but slipped under her door while she briefly slept. Heavy cream paper, no letterhead, handwritten in precise script. Dr. Chen, your questions have answers. Your truth has context. If you wish to understand fully, come to the coordinates enclosed. Come alone. Come with an open mind. Come knowing that what you learn cannot be unlearned. She recognized the handwriting style, old, European, trained in an era before keyboards. The coordinates pointed to a monastery in the Sinai Desert, a place she had read about in her research, a repository of knowledge that predated most human civilizations. She booked her flight that night. Whatever waited in that ancient place, whatever truths those crumbling walls protected, she had to know, even if knowing cost her everything she thought she was. The Sinai had been holy ground for longer than anyone could measure. 3 religions claimed it. Countless wars had raged across it. And throughout all of that human drama, this monastery had endured, crumbling, rebuilding, preserving texts that the rest of the world had forgotten. Mira arrived at sunset, when the desert turned the color of old blood. The monastery walls were the same stone as the mountain behind them, as if the building had grown rather than been built. Monks had lived here for over 1,500 years, guarding manuscripts that predated their own faith. What did they know that required such isolation? What truths were so dangerous they needed desert and stone to contain them? She walked toward the ancient gate, and the desert wind seemed to whisper warnings she couldn't quite understand. A monk met her at the gate without asking her name. He led her through corridors that wound deeper into the mountain, past frescoes so faded they might have shown anything, angels or demons, warnings or welcomes. The stone walls breathed cold air that had been circulating since before the Roman Empire fell. She had expected interrogation. Instead, she received silence. The monk walked ahead, his robes brushing stone worn smooth by centuries of passage. They descended stairs carved from living rock, past doors that looked like they hadn't opened in generations, entered chambers where the darkness felt older than language. She was being led to someone who had been waiting for her, perhaps for longer than she could imagine. In these walls, time moved differently. In these walls, truth had been kept safe. Brother Anselm was older than old, 80 years at least, though his eyes suggested he had seen far more than 8 decades could contain. His hands rested on a manuscript that looked older than the monastery itself, the vellum yellow with age, the script in a language she didn't recognize. "You found what you were looking for," he said, not a question. "And now you're afraid of what you found." His voice was soft, accented with something ancient and European. "I'm not here to comfort you, Dr. Chen. I'm here to show you why your fear is justified." He opened the manuscript. The diagrams within showed the cosmos not as astronomers understood it, but as engineers might design it. Reality, these ancient pages revealed, had been built, and someone had always known how it worked. The manuscripts predated every religion Mira knew. They showed reality as a layered construct, physical matter at the surface, consciousness at the foundation. The diagrams matched her data with impossible precision. "These were written 5,000 years ago," Anselm said, "by people who understood what you are only beginning to grasp. The laws of nature are not laws. They are agreements. Gravity is not a force. It is a consensus. Time flows forward because we all believe it should. The physical constants your instruments measure are not discovered. They are remembered into being. And this memory requires maintenance." His finger traced symbols she couldn't read. Every human mind contributes to the substrate. Every conscious moment strengthens the consensus. Without this constant, unconscious faith, reality would dissolve like a dream interrupted. We are the guardians, Anselm continued. There have always been guardians. We ensure that this knowledge never spreads too far. Not because we fear truth, Dr. Chen, but because we have seen what truth does. He closed the manuscript gently, as if it might dissolve. In 1177 BCE, a philosopher in the Eastern Mediterranean proved what you have proven. He told others. Those others told more. Within a generation, the consensus destabilized. Cities collapsed. Empires fell. The Bronze Age ended not because of invasion or drought, but because enough people began to doubt the foundations of existence. His eyes met hers, tired, ancient, certain. The last time someone proved this publicly, civilization fell back 1,000 years. We cannot allow that to happen again. They gave her a cell, a small stone room with a narrow window facing the desert. She lay on a straw mattress and tried to process what she had learned. The Bronze Age collapse, Tunguska, the Black Death's strange physics. All explained by one terrible truth: reality required maintenance. Human consciousness was not a passenger in the universe, it was the engine. And if enough passengers realized they were driving, the vehicle might crash. She thought of her colleagues dismissing her data. Not because they couldn't see the evidence, but because seeing it clearly might be the first crack in reality's foundation. She thought of the terminated investigations, the redirected careers, the convenient accidents. The Guardians had been working for millennia, and now they were asking her to join them. She left the monastery after 3 days, understanding that faith and physics were closer than she had ever imagined. But the Guardians were not just monks in ancient walls. The modern world had its own keepers of the consensus. A black car waited outside, no license plates, no visible driver. When she approached, a rear door opened on its own. "Dr. Chen," said a voice from within, "there is more you need to see." She had expected this. The monks had told her there were others, secular guardians who managed consensus threats in ways that ancient manuscripts could not. She climbed into the car without hesitation. At this point, what was there to fear? She had already learned that reality was a lie. Whatever else awaited could hardly be worse. They drove for hours. Or perhaps they flew. The vehicle's interior had no windows, no way to track movement or time. When the door finally opened, she emerged into a corridor that could have been anywhere. Underground, certainly. The air had that recycled quality. Armed guards in unmarked uniforms processed her through security checkpoints that checked things beyond physical objects. Brain scans, psychological assessments, loyalty metrics she didn't understand. "Where am I?" she asked. "Nowhere," a guard replied. And it didn't sound like evasion. It sounded like geography. This place didn't exist on any map because its existence would undermine the consensus it protected. The Grey Room, the monks had called it. A facility dedicated to ensuring that reality remained stable, that the lie kept holding the sky up. Director Hana Osei was not what Mira expected. A woman in her 60s, West African by heritage, wearing a simple gray suit and no jewelry. Her face showed the wear of someone who had spent decades making impossible decisions. "Dr. Chen," she said, and her voice carried an exhaustion that transcended personal fatigue. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to show you why we do what we do." She slid a folder across the table. Photographs, reports, data. "You think we're villains, suppressors of truth. In another world, you might be right. But in this world, we are the reason there is still a world." Her eyes held no malice, only weight. The weight of knowing, the weight of choosing, the weight of lying to protect everyone from a truth they couldn't survive. The footage was grainy, Soviet era. Trees flattened for hundreds of square kilometers. No crater, no meteorite fragments. Scientists had debated the cause for over a century. Airburst explosion, antimatter collision, exotic physics. The classified truth was simpler and more terrible. Tunguska was a consensus failure, Osei explained. The region was sparsely populated. When the Trans-Siberian Railway was rerouted away from the area in 1905, human presence dropped below critical threshold, The substrate thinned, and in 1908 it tore. The footage showed things that shouldn't exist. Trees bent at impossible angles, stones that had melted without heat, patches of ground where gravity seemed to have momentarily reversed. 30 million trees destroyed, Ose said quietly. Imagine this happening in Moscow, in New York, in Beijing. That is what we prevent. Ose led her to a larger chamber. Around a circular table sat representatives from every major nation, every major religion, every major scientific institution, Chinese and American, Christian and Muslim, physicists and priests. All of them looked tired. All of them looked certain. This is not a conspiracy of power, Ose said. It is a coalition of necessity. We disagree about everything else, politics, religion, economics. But we agree on one thing. The substrate must be protected. Reality must be maintained. The lie must hold. A Russian general nodded. A Buddhist monk pressed his palms together. An African shaman closed her eyes in what might have been prayer. These enemies had found common ground in the most fundamental truth imaginable. Existence itself depended on their silence. She stood among them, this impossible assembly of enemies united by necessity, and felt the last pillars of her old worldview collapse. She had thought she was fighting for truth. She had imagined herself as Galileo, persecuted for seeing clearly. But Galileo's truth hadn't endangered existence itself. Galileo's truth could be absorbed, eventually, without tearing the fabric of reality. What she had discovered was different. This truth was a weapon aimed at everyone, including herself, including the children playing in Geneva's parks, including everyone she had ever loved or would ever love. The Guardians were not suppressors. They were doctors performing the most delicate surgery imaginable, keeping the patient alive by ensuring the patient never learned they were ill. And now they wanted her to hold the scalpel. She returned to Geneva changed. The city looked the same, the lake, the fountains, the precise Swiss order, but now she saw through it. Every building, every streetcar, every tree existed because billions of minds agreed they should. The stone beneath her feet was solid only because no one doubted it. She walked among crowds of people and saw them as unwitting participants in the most elaborate construction project ever undertaken, the continuous creation of reality itself. They laughed, argued, hurried to meetings, checked their phones. None of them knew. None of them could know. If they knew, their knowledge would become another thread in the tapestry, a thread that pulled instead of wove. She had become something she didn't have a word for, not enlightened, not cursed, something in between, something that could never go back. She sat in a plaza and watched the faithful, not religious faithful, the faithful of existence. The woman arguing on her phone, believing that sound traveled through air. The children running toward the fountain, trusting that water would spray upward when pressure was applied. The old man feeding pigeons, certain that gravity would pull breadcrumbs down. Every action, every assumption, every moment of taking reality for granted, these were acts of creation. 8 billion minds dreaming the same dream, holding the universe together with the power of not questioning. She understood now why ignorance had to be protected. These people's innocence was not weakness, it was infrastructure. Their unquestioned assumptions were the steel beams of existence. And she, who now questioned everything, had become a structural threat simply by knowing what she knew. She saw it happen. A moment that would have seemed like imagination before her transformation. The clock tower across the plaza, 100 years old, precise as Swiss engineering demanded. Its second hand stuttered, moved backward, corrected itself. The glitch lasted perhaps 2 seconds. No one else noticed, or rather, no one else allowed themselves to notice. Their minds smoothed over the inconsistency, editing reality to match expectations. This was how the substrate worked. Small failures constantly, automatically repaired by collective assumption. The Guardians had told her, "You will see the cracks now. You will notice when reality hiccups. This is part of your burden." She watched the clock resume its normal ticking and wondered how many glitches she had unconsciously corrected in her life. How many times her mind had edited away the impossible. A group of children played on the grass nearby, their games built on perfect trust in physics. They threw a ball, confident it would arc predictably. They jumped from low walls, certain gravity would catch them softly. They chased each other, never doubting that their bodies would respond to intention. These children were the most important believers in the universe. Their faith was pure, uncontaminated by doubt. Every generation of children rebuilt the consensus from scratch, accepting reality as given because no one told them otherwise. And every generation of guardians worked to ensure that innocence remained intact. She was watching the future, minds that would one day carry the weight of existence without knowing they carried anything at all. Protecting this innocence was not paternalism, it was survival. The weight settled into her bones. Not depression, something deeper. The loneliness of being unable to share what she knew. The endless vigilance of seeing through surfaces. The guilt of every normal conversation where she performed ignorance while knowing the truth underneath. She had wanted to understand the universe. She had achieved that goal, and understanding had cost her the ability to simply live in it. Every physicist dreams of the unified theory, the equation that explains everything. She had found something like that, and discovered that some explanations are burdens rather than gifts. The universe was more magnificent than she had imagined. It was also more fragile, and she could never again rest in the comfortable illusion that it would take care of itself. That night, she stood at her window and looked at the stars. For the first time, she understood what she was really seeing. Not distant suns governed by impersonal physics. Not a universe that would exist whether humanity looked at it or not. She was seeing a ceiling painted by collective dreaming. Every star a shared memory. Every galaxy a consensus of light. The distances were real because humans agreed they were real. The laws that governed stellar evolution operated because billions of minds expected them to. Somewhere out there, the signal pulsed, something from outside the consensus layer, broadcasting into a reality that depended on not knowing it was a broadcast. The sky was beautiful. The sky was a lie, and the lie was the most beautiful thing she had ever understood. They called her back to CERN 6 months later, not to the particle physics division, to a facility she hadn't known existed, buried even deeper than the accelerator tunnels. Radio telescopes networked across 5 continents fed data to screens that no one outside this room would ever see. "We've been tracking something," Director Osei explained. "Something that doesn't fit the consensus model, something broadcasting from outside." Mira studied the data with eyes that now understood what data meant. The signal was regular, too regular for natural phenomena. It contained patterns that seemed almost like language, but not any language humanity had invented. And it was getting stronger. Year by year, decade by decade, the signal intensified. Something was speaking to humanity, or perhaps something was counting down. The visualization made the pattern clear. Pulses that repeated, evolved, repeated with variation. Mathematical relationships that seemed designed to be recognized. The signal had started weak, barely distinguishable from cosmic background radiation in 1947. The same year humanity split the atom. The same year we became capable of ending our own existence. Correlation or causation? Mira asked. Unknown, Osei admitted. We've modeled 17 possibilities. Either the signal is responding to human technological development, or it always existed and we only now have instruments sensitive enough to detect it, or... She paused. Or it's been here all along, and it's what's been weakening the substrate, siphoning belief, preparing something. The countdown structure in the signal suggested a deadline. They had no way to know when that deadline would arrive. The Guardians disagreed about everything except the danger. Some believed the signal was a warning, an external observer trying to alert humanity to the fragility of their construction. Others argued it was a weapon, a mimetic virus designed to destabilize consensus by introducing doubt. A few suggested it might be humanity's own future, broadcasting backward through time, trying to prevent or cause something they couldn't predict. "What if it's friendly?" a young physicist asked. The room went quiet. "Then it's the most dangerous thing imaginable," Mira said, surprising herself. A friendly external intelligence would want to help us understand ourselves. It would share knowledge, and knowledge is precisely what the substrate cannot survive. Even salvation, in this context, might look exactly like destruction. Director Osei pulled up a chart spanning 7 decades. The signal's intensity had been steady for years, then began accelerating around 2012. By 2020, it was growing exponentially. At this rate, Osei said, the signal will become impossible to ignore within 15 years. Either we learn to shield human consciousness from it, or we find its source and stop it, or the substrate fails, Mira finished. The Bronze Age collapse, but global, permanent. Osei nodded. We've been protecting humanity from itself for 3,000 years. We never prepared for a threat from outside. The Guardians had spent millennia managing internal risks, individual scientists, isolated revelations, local consensus failures. They had no playbook for cosmic intervention. Whatever was sending the signal, it wasn't bound by their rules. The historical correlations were disturbing. Every major signal spike corresponded to a period of global instability. Not political instability, substrate instability. The 1908 spike preceded Tunguska by 3 months. The 1929 spike preceded the stock market crash by 6 weeks. Each time, human consciousness had been temporarily disrupted. Collective fear, shared uncertainty, consensus wobbling. We don't know if the signal causes instability, Osei said, or if instability opens channels for the signal. Either way, they're connected. Mira studied the timeline. The 2008 financial crisis had been accompanied by the largest signal spike on record, until 2020, until the pandemic, until a world of isolated minds separated from each other, their consensus fragmenting into incompatible realities. Something is weakening us, she said, from outside, and we're helping it. She began to dream about the signal, not interpret it, just experience it. The patterns invaded her sleep, playing behind her eyelids in the moment before waking. Sometimes it seemed like it was trying to communicate. Other times it felt like observation, something vast and patient watching humanity the way humans watched bacteria under microscopes. Did it know about the substrate? Did it understand that human consciousness was all that held the universe together? Perhaps it was studying them. Perhaps it was hungry. Perhaps it was simply curious about the strange little species that had accidentally dreamed reality into existence. She couldn't know. None of them could know. But she suspected, in the way that Guardians learned to suspect, that the signal was not going to wait for them to figure it out. The paper was finished. 200 pages documenting everything, the correlation between consciousness and gravity, the historical pattern of suppression, the existence of the Guardians, the truth about reality's architecture. She had written it in secret, a final act of the scientist she used to be. Her finger hovered over the publish button. One click, and the knowledge would spread across every physics forum in the world. Within hours, minds would begin to understand. Within days, doubt would propagate. Within weeks, she couldn't predict within weeks. Maybe nothing. Maybe the substrate would absorb the shock. Or maybe the Bronze Age collapse would look like a minor setback compared to what came next. She had the power to end the world as everyone knew it, and she couldn't decide if that was liberation or murder. She imagined it happening, the knowledge spreading like a virus, each understanding mind another crack in the foundation. At first, small anomalies, objects behaving strangely, time hiccuping more frequently, the cracks she had learned to see becoming visible to everyone. Then acceleration. As more people doubted, there would be more reason to doubt. A feedback loop of epistemological collapse. The sky wouldn't fall dramatically, it would simply become uncertain. Gravity would flicker. Light would hesitate. Time would stutter. And in the chaos, 8 billion people would realize simultaneously that they had been dreaming the universe into existence without knowing it, and the dream would shatter because dreamers cannot dream when they know they're dreaming. She saw cities dissolving. She saw reality unmade. She saw the end of everything humanity had ever built. Her phone rang. David, the ex-husband she had not spoken to in months. "I heard you've been working too hard," he said, genuine worry in his voice. Some of your colleagues called. They're concerned." She almost laughed. Her colleagues were concerned about her mental health while she held the fate of reality in her hands. "I'm fine," she said, "just processing some difficult results." "Want to talk about it?" This man she had loved, had failed to love enough, still cared about her. He represented everything normal, the world that didn't know, the innocent consensus, the faith that kept stars burning. If she pressed publish, his reality would dissolve too. His children from his second marriage, his ordinary life, everything he trusted without thinking. Could she do that to him, to everyone? Brother Anselm's voice echoed in her mind. The last time someone proved this publicly, the Bronze Age collapsed. Thousands of years of progress erased, libraries burned, cities abandoned, knowledge lost that took millennia to recover. And that had been local, a Mediterranean phenomenon that the rest of the world's consensus had eventually absorbed. Today there was no isolation. Today, information traveled at light speed. Today, a revelation in Geneva would reach Beijing and São Paulo and Lagos within hours. The entire planetary consciousness would receive the truth simultaneously. There would be no unaffected regions to stabilize the failing ones. No backup dreamers to maintain the substrate while others woke up. If she pressed publish, it wouldn't be the Bronze Age collapse. It would be the end of ages, the final waking. Osi found her 3 days later, still sitting before her computer, still undecided. She didn't demand, didn't threaten. She simply sat down across from Mira and waited. "I could have stopped you," Osi finally said. "We have tools for that, but we learned long ago that forced guardians make poor protectors. You have to choose this." Mira looked at her, this woman who had carried the same weight for decades. "How do you live with it?" "By remembering what I'm protecting," Osei said. "Not abstract humanity, specific people. Children I've watched grow up without knowing how fragile their playground is. Scientists who pursue truth without knowing what truth costs. Everyone who gets to live a normal life because someone chose to carry this burden." She paused. "Including you once. She was left alone with her choice. Publish and become the person who ended humanity's dream. Suppress and become the person she had once despised, a guardian of lies, a keeper of comfortable ignorance. There was no third option, no compromise that served both truth and survival. This was the trap the universe had set for anyone who looked too closely. Understand enough to break everything, or understand enough to know breaking is unacceptable." She thought about the children in the park, the old man feeding pigeons, David living his ordinary life, her colleagues pursuing truth with innocent courage. 8 billion minds, all of them depending on a fabric they would never know was there. Could she tear that fabric for the sake of a truth they would only experience as annihilation? She began with the paper copies. 20 years of work, feeding page by page into flames. The correlations, the historical evidence, the mathematical proofs, everything she had spent her life pursuing, everything that represented truth at its most fundamental, transformed to ash and smoke. It should have felt like failure. Instead, it felt like surgery, removing a tumor that would kill the patient if allowed to grow. She watched equations curl and blacken, data sets dissolve into heat. Her scientific career was ending in this fireplace. Everything she had built, everything she had believed made her who she was, sacrificed on the altar of a higher necessity. Not truth at any cost, she understood now. Truth at the cost truth itself could bear. The digital copies required more violence. She had been thorough, multiple backups, encrypted storage, distributed files. Now she was thorough in destruction, hammers shattering drive platters, secure deletion software wiping servers, encrypted files decrypted only to be overwritten with random data. The Guardians helped, their technical resources vast and invisible. By the end, there was no trace of her research anywhere on Earth. It was as if she had never discovered anything, as if the truth had never been proved. She felt each deleted file as a small death. The scientist in her dying, bit by bit, to make room for something else, something that could carry weight without being crushed by it, something that could know the worst and still protect the best. One copy remained, A single USB drive she had hidden even from herself, a final insurance policy against the possibility that she might change her mind. She held it over the flames, watching plastic begin to soften in the heat. Part of her still wanted to save it. Part of her still believed that truth should always survive, that knowledge should always be preserved, that the scientist's duty was to discovery, not protection. But she had learned something science couldn't teach her. Some discoveries are not meant to be shared. Some truths are not tools. They are weapons, and some weapons must be destroyed, even if they might have been used for good, because the risk of their misuse is too absolute to accept. She let go. The drive fell into the fire. She entered the gray room for the second time, but this time the doors opened before she reached them. This time, seats shifted to make space for her at the table. This time, the faces watching her carried recognition, not assessment. She had passed the only test that mattered. She had proven she could carry the weight. "Welcome," Director Osei said. Not warmly. Guardians couldn't afford warmth, but with respect, with acknowledgement of what she had sacrificed. The Russian general nodded. The Buddhist monk pressed his palms together. The African shaman closed her eyes. These strangers had become her family, the only people on Earth who would ever understand what she had given up and why. She had traded truth for responsibility, science for service, her old self for something harder to name. The oath was older than any religion. She placed her hand on a tablet covered in symbols that predated writing, the original notation for the consensus equations, carved by hands that had first understood what reality was. "I swear to protect the substrate," she said, the words given to her by Osei, "to maintain the consensus, to bear the weight of truth so that others may live in comfortable ignorance, to lie for the sake of existence, to guard the lie that holds the sky." Around her, the Guardians repeated each phrase. Their voices echoed with the weight of centuries, thousands of years of sacrifice, thousands of years of carrying the burden, and now she was one of them. The scientist who had sought truth had become the guardian who would ensure truth never spread. They gave her credentials that would open doors she hadn't known existed, access to facilities in every country, authority that transcended governments, resources that appeared from nowhere and disappeared without trace. "Your old life is over," Osei told her. "You can maintain the appearance of normality, your apartment, your title, your former colleagues, but you will never be Dr. Mira Chen again. You will be what we all become, a shadow holding up the light." She looked at the badge in her hand. No name, no photo, just a symbol she now recognized from ancient manuscripts. The mark of those who carried the sky. Her old self was gone. The woman who had believed in truth above all, who had pursued knowledge with innocent fervor, that woman had burned with her research. What remained was something harder, something necessary. 5 years passed, then 10. Mira watched the world continue its dreaming, unaware of how close it came to waking. She aged, as everyone ages, but she aged with knowledge that set her apart from ordinary mortals. She had seen behind the curtain and chosen to hold it closed. CERN continued its research. Particles still collided at nearly the speed of light. Scientists still pursued truth with the innocent courage she remembered from her own early career. And she watched them, these seekers she had once been, knowing that she would lie to them if necessary, knowing that she had become the very thing she once would have despised: guardian, protector, keeper of the comfortable lie. The irony was not lost on her. Nothing was lost on her anymore. His name was Dr. Thomas Reyes. 28 years old, brilliant, driven by the same hunger for truth that had once defined her. He stood before a screen showing gravitational anomalies that correlated with population density. His voice trembled with the excitement of discovery. "The data is undeniable," he said. "There's a pattern here that our current models can't explain. Gravity appears to respond to the presence of conscious observers." Mira sat in the back of the room, watching him present her own findings to a new generation. The same data, the same correlations, the same impossible conclusions. He had found what she had found. He was standing where she had stood, and she knew with the certainty of a guardian, what had to happen next. She saw herself in his eyes. The same fire, the same conviction that truth was worth any cost, the same ignorance of what that cost actually was. He didn't know yet that he had stumbled onto forbidden ground. He didn't know that minds like his had found this truth before, and that those minds had been silenced, redirected, sometimes eliminated. He was approaching a cliff edge in the dark, and he thought he was climbing a mountain. She felt sorrow, not for what she would have to do, but for who he would become if she did it wrong. He could be a guardian if he had the strength, or he could be a casualty if she failed to guide him. The burden of choice was hers, as it had always been, as it always would be. She stood. The room went quiet. Her reputation preceded her, the senior physicist who had studied these anomalies decades ago. "Dr. Reyes," she said, her voice calm, "your work is impressive. Your correlations are intriguing, but you're making a common error in gravitational research." She walked toward his display, pointing at the data she knew was accurate. "Instrumentation error. The sensitivity of modern equipment creates false patterns. I spent years chasing the same anomalies you're seeing now. They led nowhere." His face fell. The particular devastation of a young scientist being told their discovery is a mirage. "The data," he began, "is noise," she said firmly. "Elegant noise, but noise." She held his eyes, willing him to accept the lie that would save him from a truth he couldn't survive. Dr. Reyes gathered his notes with hands that trembled slightly. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She had crushed something in him, the particular hope that comes from believing you found something no one else has seen. He walked past her toward the door, his career not ended but redirected. He would move on to safer research, publish papers that threatened nothing, live a normal life in a reality that would never reveal its secrets to him. She had done this. She had taken a seeker and turned him into a civilian. Part of her wanted to call out, to tell him he was right, to welcome him into the terrible fraternity of those who knew. But she remained silent. This was mercy. This was protection. This was the burden guardians bore. The room emptied. Mira stood alone before the screen where impossible truth had been displayed, and would be displayed again by other seekers, and would be denied again by other guardians forever. This was her life now. This was all their lives, the shadow work of holding up the sky so others could live beneath it without fear. She had become what she hated, and she understood why, not because the truth was too dangerous for ordinary minds, but because the truth required extraordinary sacrifice to keep contained. Someone had to carry this weight. Someone had to tell the necessary lies. Someone had to watch seekers walk away into comfortable ignorance and know that this was kindness, not cruelty. The camera holds on her face, the burden visible, the acceptance complete, the lie that holds the sky intact. For now.